to know them. We need to know them in order to understand the concepts behind interpreting. How do the scholars actually look at interpreting, and how do they analyze interpreting in terms of a cognitive process, in terms of mental operations or processes that are, or procedures that are happening. We need to look at various different schools here, in particular. Jihan Misbah is saying Jazakallah khairan. Now I'm just going to actually look at some of these models, because these models will give us an idea of how the interpreter actually works when they are doing interpreting, whether it's interpreting simultaneously or consecutively. How do they work, and how does it being analyzed by the scholars? We have, of course, here we have Ocean Blue saying Assalamu alaikum, wa alaikum assalam. Let's have a look at these models. First one here that we have all these various scholars here. We have Selezkovich, Lederer, Cherkov, Gile, Gerver, Chernov, and Coakley. And of course, I'm going to just very briefly talk about them so that we don't spend too much time on each one of them. The first one that is relating to Selezkovich. Selezkovich is well known for her model about translation and process, and also she's very known for the actual processing. She says that there is what's called triangular process, and the triangular process is at the pinnacle of it will be the word sense, or the construct of sense. So sense is really the most important element in Selezkovich model. In this model, there will be not only, what Selezkovich is saying is that when you are translating, you're not actually just only doing linguistic transcoding, i.e. we are not actually moving from one code to another. There are some fixed ones, such as proper names, numbers, and special terms. These are fixed, that we know them, and they are the ones that we don't need to, we can transcode straight away. But there is also that the interpreter needs to be understanding and also needs to express sense in their interpreting session. And that is what is important. As I said before, that as she said before, she said that to interpret, one must first understand. And that's very, very important. Now, about sense, she's saying that there are three elements in sense. First, that you have to be conscious, aware of the environment around you. Secondly, you have to look at the linguistic meaning that's coming in, and add to it some cognitive information of yours, which is what is the background information that you read before you went into the conference interpreting, what kind of background information you need to add to the linguistic meaning that you hear or you have an input in. And the third thing is non-verbal. In other words, that what you are listening to as a linguistic form is going to be going into your memory, cognitive memory, and it's going to be non-verbal, i.e. it's not words anymore. It's just a concept in your head running. If you hear the word house, it's no longer the word H-O-U-S-E. It is more of the concept. In other words, that it becomes language-free, deverbalized utterance meaning. So in other words, deverbalized means it's no longer words that are verbally pronounced, but they are being deverbalized, becomes not words. And plus the transcoding, of course, that you need to do that. And this is what the Paris School is about. Here we can look at the triangular process, and you can see that language 1, L1, while you are transcoding, you go up, while you're interpreting, to sense at the pinnacle of this triangular process. And of course, from the sense, you come down to the language 2. And this triangle has been improved later on to make it into the agents that are involved in this process, which are the speaker, the interpreter, and the listener. And of course, the speaker is expressing in L1, language 1, and then the interpreter is using the words to non-verbal sense. In other words, the words that you hear in your ear, they go into your head and become non-verbal. They just become sense, they just become meaning in your head, which you need to code again, or produce or express so that the listener can listen to you in the second language. And that is really the first one with the Seleskovich. We move on to Lederer in 1981, where she's developed the idea that there are 8 mental operations, and 2 of them, 2 or more, are running concurrently, running at the same time, together at any time, at any one time. And these 8 operations, there are some of them are continuous and some of them are intermittent. Continuous, successive, concurrent operations. These are operations that are happening at the same time, or successively means one after the other. The first mental operation is listening. You have to be a good listener. You have to listen well, and that is the first task, if you like. Second mental operation is language comprehension. So you listen, but you need to understand what you're listening to. It's like when the mother is listening to her children. Sometimes she doesn't comprehend what they are saying. She just wants to shut them up and just say, yeah. But she doesn't seem to comprehend what they are trying to say. So listening and comprehension is very important after listening. And then after that, it's what's called conceptualization. Conceptualization means that you are making a concept, formulating a concept. And this concept is constructed in the cognitive memory, in your own cognitive memory as an interpreter. And then you actually integrate in that memory the input, which is linguistic, which is what you hear in your ear. You integrate it with prior knowledge, the knowledge that you have been preparing before the conference. In other words, when you are going to a conference, you have to prepare some information before you go to the conference, and this is called prior knowledge. So information you read in English, you read in Arabic, you read in L1, you read in L2 before the conference. You can't go to the conference straight away. You have to have some preparation, and that's called prior knowledge. You put it in your head so that you can actually then match it with your linguistic input during the conference when you are listening. So you listen, you hear what's the input, linguistic input, and you combine it with your prior knowledge before the conference when you are preparing. And then you're expressing it. You express this memory, cognitive memory, which consists of the input and the knowledge together. So, in other words, what you hear during the conference is not only the linguistic input in your ear, but also you have to combine it with the prior knowledge which you have prepared before you went into the conference, usually 2 to 3 days beforehand. So these are the concurrent operations, the ones that are happening at the same time. 2 of them or more are working at the same time, or successively, one after the other, which is listening, comprehension, conceptualization. You're formulating the concept and then expressing that from your memory. The second section, if you like, are the 2 operations, which is awareness of the situation. You need to be aware of the conference. Let's say if the conference is attended by ministers, you need to be aware of that, or you need to be aware if they are heads of states and kings and leaders. Then you need to be aware of the situation of that conference, what that conference is about. Also, you need to be self-monitoring yourself. In other words, you are monitoring what you are saying, the output. So you are listening to what you are saying as well, to an extent, because it's intermittent, manifestation. It appears and disappears, not all the time, because it's an underlying operation, It's continuous, but it's underlying. It's not really concurrently happening. The last 2 of the 8 are the intermittent operations of transcoding, which is the names and the numbers and the specialized terms. These are, you just transcode them very quickly and very easily. But there's also retrieval of specialized lexical words, which you need to remember what they are, and you need to recall them and retrieve them from your memory every now and then. That's why it's called intermittent, means it's not all the time happening. It's happening every now and then. Then we move on with letterer, as we can see, the summary of it is that there is perception of the linguistic input. So you have to perceive what's been, what you're listening to linguistically. You have to conceptualize and then express. And that's how you do the work. Kirchhoff, however, is a different one where you have a different kind of attitude towards interpreting as a model, simultaneous interpreting, which is what's called information theory. And that is based on decoding, because you hear the codes coming into your ear, so you decode them, i.e. you break them down into what they mean. And then recoding, which means you put them in the L2, which is recoding them, means you are putting them in another language, recoding them. And then you are producing them, producing the recodes that you have actually worked out in your head. You produce them, you output them. And then finally you monitor what you are outputting. You watch what you are saying. So not only what you are decoding and recoding and producing, but also monitoring, and that is similar to monitoring yourself. And that is part of the information theory according to Kirchhoff. So Kirchhoff really is talking about some of the linguistic surface structure, okay? And sometimes it is in contrast, of course, to Seleskovic, which is theory du sens, which is theory of sense. So it's not really, it's more of a psycholinguistic processing difficulty that you come across in Kirchhoff's model. Kirchhoff's model, psychological processing, there is a problem of, there are some notions like cognitive load and processing capacity. You might have been receiving quite a lot of load which is going into your mind, the cognitive load which is there. Of course, that is being matched with the processing capacity. How much your brain is processing. Does it have the capacity to process the load that it's receiving cognitively? So if it's receiving it cognitively, this load, if this load is bigger than processing capacity, then the interpreter is not doing any interpreting. But you need to have the processing capacity quite high to match the cognitive load there. So that is really one of the issues there. So also, I mean, if the cognitive decisions are exceeding the individual processing capacity limit, sometimes if it is higher than your limit, your processing limit, your mind is not processing, the capacity of your mind is not processing well. And that is really an issue. That's why it is exceeding sometimes the limit of your capacity when you are processing the information. And that is really problematic. So that is for Kirchhoff. We move on to Giles' effort model or models. In Giles, there are three main concepts or main efforts, and they are listening and analysis, called L, production, which means outputting, and M for memory. And that is how it is working that. I mean, this is how the mental energy is available from the actual interpreter. This is how much processing effort that this interpreter is doing. So you've got listening and analysis, which is L. So you listen and you analyze. Before that, you listen. In the previous ones, as you remember, in Lederer, you are listening and comprehending, and then conceptualizing. Here, you are listening and analyzing here, okay? And of course, there is a production, which you are producing, you are outputting, and the memory, you are using your memory when you are doing that as well. So L plus P plus M. And this is what it is. L, P, and M, it should be smaller than the capacity, your capacity. In other words, you should have all these three efforts, they should not exceed your capacity of processing. Sometimes later on, Giles has called it capacity coordination effort. So you have to have these four things, which is L, P, and M together. And that's what we see here when you have the simultaneous interpreting. You've got the first, you've got the L, listening and analysis, P, P for production, M for memory, and Co for coordinating effort. All of these will make simultaneous interpreting. However, there is what's required, like for example, you have the what is listening and analysis required, memory required, production required, and capacity required or coordination required. These are all required to have the total requirement for you. I'll explain that in easier terms. I would say there is what's called required and available. Okay? So if you are listening and analyzing, and it is what is required, it should be smaller or equals to learning or to listening and listening availability. So you should be having availability, i.e. you will be available, to be equal or bigger than what is required for listening. Again, your memory should be available, which equals and bigger than the memory that is required from you in the interpreting booth. Production availability from you should be equals or above the production required as well in the booth. And also coordination availability should be higher than coordination required in the booth. So you need to have higher level of availability compared to what is required, okay, in order to be able to do that. Now, when interpreters are having difficulties, that means their availability, whether it's listening and analysis or memory or production or coordination, is lower, is smaller than what is required. Lower, for example, a listening and analysis requirement, if it is higher than listening and analysis availability, then you can't interpret. If your memory availability is smaller than memory required in the booth, then that is when you do not interpret well. The same with production and the same with coordination. So that's really the main ones. Another point is about, of course, this is the tightrope hypothesis of Giles. What Giles is saying is that there is the problem triggers. There are some problem triggers that could happen, the effect of problem triggers, such as proper names. Sometimes they might create a problem for you. You fail to actually get them. Or the numbers, you need to write them down with a pencil on the side. Always, I usually have a white sheet next to me, and I write the number. As soon as I hear it, I write it on a piece of paper so that I remember that one, because it's difficult for me, for my memory, to remember. And also the technical terms, which you need to remember as well. Then we have Gerver. Gerver talks about time lag, when you are lagging behind the speaker. Okay, so you will be about 2-3 seconds less, but of course this time lag you cannot avoid, but you shouldn't fall behind very long time, very long way away from the speaker. Memory use, you use the memory very little, and output monitoring, you monitor your output constantly. So these are the three findings that are found with regards to Gerver. Gerver also talks about buffer store and output buffer. Buffer store means when it comes to your mind, there is a buffer area where you store the information for a very short time, and for the output, when you actually, before you speak, you just put it in the buffer to wait and think about it before you output. So you don't, it's like pre-testing the output before you do the output. Now, what is interesting about Gerver's is backtracking, which means reprocessing. Sometimes you want to improve some previous output. How do you do that? Because the term can occur first time, and maybe later on it occurs again, where you can improve on that term again. So that's what's called previous output being improved. So that's the only time you can improve it, through backtracking, when the term is mentioned second time, and the first time you couldn't remember what it is, that term, but the second time you remember, and that is how you improve your previous output. After Gerver, which we have looked at, there is what's called Chernov. And I like Chernov because he talks about the actual information processing and what's called rhyme and theme. And I've talked about that before. If you go back to rhyme and theme in my recordings, when I was talking about in Mona Baker, I remember I was recording something about theme and rhyme. Theme means that it's a known information, an unknown information. For example, when you say Selwa is cooking dinner. Selwa, we know it's old information, and cooking dinner is new information. She is hardworking. Also, the word she is old information, and hardworking is new information. So that's how you divide the text according to messages, rhyme and theme. Known messages like Salwa and she, they are known, they are expected, and unknown information on new information, which is hardworking and cooking dinner. And that is how you work out your interpreting. So when you are listening to the interpreting session by the speaker, you remove the known information and you only bring the new information every time in every sentence. That's how you work. So you work on the, remove the old information, i.e. what is repeated. Like for example, if he says Pakistan, Pakistan, Pakistan many times, it becomes old information. But what's Pakistan doing next? Everything that's new in information in every message, you need to put it forward and put it in. And that is really for Chernov with regards to the messages and how the messages should be forwarded. You can see here, it's talking about message reception, message retention. You don't retain the message for a long time, you don't keep it for a long time. And you've got also message formulation and message production. You can see that it's all based on messages and not on just only words, but on the messages. Receiving the message, retaining the message for a very short time, okay, formulating the message, and producing the message, message production. Formulating like conceptualizing, as we've seen it earlier. And then we have Cochlear, which is the last one here. And in Cochlear, we look at this is about the long memory and about the cross-cultural awareness and cross-linguistic awareness and linguistic markers as opposed to social markers. And that is what Cochlear is all about. So in Cochlear, as you can see, this is Cochlear speaking about the messages, retaining them. My apologies, I didn't say Chernov. This is not Chernov, this is Cochlear speaking about messages, and they are receiving them, retaining them, and formulating them and producing them. Have a nice day, everyone. I hope that you have received or have learned something from today's about modals. Have a nice day.